Let's now take a look at the everyday lives of people living in the Roman Republican period. For this, we're going to look at a very special site. It's the city of Pompeii. Now, some of you may be familiar with this site. Pompeii was a Roman city that was buried by a volcanic eruption in the year 79 CE. Here in this map, you can see it's south of Rome. It's very close to the modern-day city of Naples, and it is an active archaeological site. Portions of it have been open to the public. In fact, you can take a day trip from Rome, hop on a bus, go down to Pompeii for the day, and then end back up in Rome at the end of the day. You can take guided tours, or you can go out on your own and explore. But many areas of the city are still roped off because they are active archaeological sites where excavation is still happening. The city of Pompeii was a mercantile city. It was located along key trade routes on the Italian peninsula, and it also was known and celebrated for its olive orchards and wine orchards. Here in this aerial view, we can see and appreciate the gridded system typical of a Roman town. The Romans liked efficiency, and you know what's efficient? Lining up all your streets, north and south, east and west. The center of town, right here, is where a lot of the trade would happen. The markets, the fish market, the meat market, the textile merchants. This is also where the key temples to the gods were located. And then as you walked away from the center of town, you would go into various neighborhoods. There's also a theater. There was a gladiator ring. We have here an amphitheater. It was a bustling town. Now, what happened was Mount Vesuvius, which, hold on, here's a nice zoom in of that downtown center. This here was a temple. These are some of the major markets that you would go into for your raw materials or goods. And think of this almost like an outdoor mall. Okay, so what happened? Well, Pompeii is located at the foot of a massive volcano, an active volcano. Here is Mount Vesuvius. And Mount Vesuvius erupted. It erupted, and hot lava and volcanic gas and ash filled the sky. And within 6 hours, Pompeii was buried in 82 feet of volcanic ash. It's estimated that about 16,000 people died in this explosion in just 6 hours. The eruption was so massive that we have evidence of volcanic ash traveling across the Mediterranean and landing on the other side of North Africa. Here in this map, we're seeing the eruption, and sheets of hot magma and boiling mud came down the sides of Mount Vesuvius, and it also ruined several other Roman towns, including Herculaneum. Pompeii had a overwhelming amount of volcanic ash fall on top. This volcanic ash, here, this is another really good, there you go. This volcanic ash fell on the city, and with that, perfectly preserved the roads, the buildings, and most shockingly, some of the people. One of the reasons why Pompeii is such a popular or well-known site is because of the bodies that have been uncovered. The figures that we're looking at here are the results of a chemical reaction. When the ash fell on top of these bodies, they the ash calcified, creating a shell over their remains. And as the bodies deteriorated inside, the shell remained. So underneath these figures are the bones of the dead. And they offer a haunting but extremely helpful understanding of everyday life in the Roman world. Here we see some loaves of bread that were still out on the kitchen countertop cooling and have been petrified by the falling ash. Now when we look at these figures, we see them have fallen on the streets, and we think, oh, do they just like lay down and die? No, many of the bodies show that they suffered wounds, injuries from falling debris. As the ash fell on the houses then collapsed on top of these people, and many of them fell down in the streets from suffocation. They died of suffocation because as that hot ball of ash rose up over the city, it burned all the oxygen out of the air, and so many of them were running for their lives and fell in the streets where they were buried by this volcanic ash. I know it's intense. I have a lot more information about the bodies and what we have uncovered about the people of Pompeii. If you want to know more, you can always email me. Let's look at the rediscovery of Pompeii. This happened in 1738. The reason why Pompeii is such an amazing example of a perfectly preserved city is that once it was buried under the ash, it remained relatively undisturbed. It wasn't until 1738 when the King of Naples wanted a summer palace built on this site that the construction crew started to dig up for the foundation and accidentally uncovered the lost city of Pompeii. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, lost city, didn't people remember that it was there? Of course people remembered it was there. Roman accounts from the time of the eruption show that there were several rescue envoys sent during the eruption period, and then after the eruption there was a period of time when survivors were allowed to go back to the site and try to dig up and find their houses, find their loved ones, but the task was impossible, and the destruction was so catastrophic that over time the city, or I should say the roads leading to Pompeii, were redirected. It was taken off of maps and forgotten, and then again rediscovered when the King of Naples wanted to build at the site. And with that discovery, we have been able to understand so much about everyday lives because of all that was left. Not only the people, but the wall paintings, the artworks, the furniture, and here we have a perfectly preserved Roman street. It is so similar to a modern day street. We have a paved road. On either side, we have sidewalks. This specific street was filled with, or lined with, buildings that were about 2 stories tall. The lower levels served as open kitchen areas, and then the upper areas were apartments. Think of this like a row of fast food vendors, because that's how these would have served. Those open kitchens were there to serve people on the sides of the street. So you would pop on in, meet your friends, have a little hot something to eat here, and then continue walking down the street. And then there were apartments on the second levels. This little ... thing, what are these? Anybody know? Can you guess? What are those rocks in the middle of the road? When I ask this question in class, students will say they're there to prevent carriages from walking or running through. I like that idea, like a barrier, but no. They are separated by grooves to allow for carriage wheels to go through and for the animal pulling that carriage to walk through. So it's not a barrier. Any other ideas? It's a crosswalk. Because these are paved roads, we have to imagine them to have been covered with dirt and grime, animal poop, slop, and you don't want to walk through that. So you would pop across those raised stones to get from one side of the street to the other. It's a crosswalk. Fantastic. Here we are inside of one of those street kitchens. So these are where the hot pots would have been placed, and you'd kind of sidle up to the counter and order your food. Here's another view. Pompeii had all the characteristics of a typical Roman city. It had a government center, it had temples, it had streets lined up on a grid plane, north, south, east, west, sidewalks, it had theaters, public bathhouses, gymnasiums, markets, it had sewers, and it had public water fountains. Neighborhoods were divided into working class and middle class, upper class. Along the outskirts, farther from the main city center, were larger mansions with working farms. These were called villas. So we have these beautiful remains of the hustle and bustle of a typical Roman city. This is a map provided by the Pompeii Archaeological Foundation, and it's showing you a little bit more of the division of the city. We're not going to get into all of these elements, but instead I want us to go up here into quadrant 6. This quadrant is known as kind of fancy neighborhood, upper class. A lot of bigger townhomes are on this side of Pompeii, and we're going to go look at one right now. Here it is. This is the atrium inside of the house of the Vettii. So I've highlighted the word atrium because it is your vocabulary term. An atrium is the central reception room that is partly open to the sky from above. So we're standing here, we've just come in off of the street, and this is our front space, our front room. And this is typical of these large Roman houses. You would have an atrium with an opening from in the ceiling, and that opening would not only allow light and air, but would also provide rainwater that would be caught in this shallow pond here, or pool. And then there are drainage holes that go under, and it is a cistern or a storage for the rainwater that would then be used by the inhabitants of the house. Here's another view of the house of Vettii. Now it's called the house of the Vettii because records preserved within the structure show that this was owned by two brothers, and they were the Vettii brothers. So the house of the Vettii is the house of these two brothers, their last name Vettii. I love this image because you can see some of the painted decorations on the walls that remain. See, there's that hole that would lead the water down into the cistern. Here's another view of it. So now we're standing on the other end of the atrium. This is the door to the street, and then more windows up high that would allow light and air in, but without all the noise and the dirt and the grime of the city. This is a typical Roman house. Now, I don't want you to get overwhelmed by the floor plan here, but a typical Roman house would have a single opening on the street, and the interior rooms would look into a central space that was open to the sky above. Here we're seeing the atrium, where we were standing in front of that basin of water. And if you were to continue forward, this middle part of a typical Roman house was an area of admin or business. If you had a trade, if you, however you worked from home, your business would be held or managed in this area. And then once you would get to the back of the house, this was the private living quarters of the residents. The cubiculum, that's a word meaning room or cube, would be where you would sleep, and in the center would be a kind of a garden, like a kitchen garden. It's where you would grow some of your fresh plants. It also would be your own kind of outdoor space. You don't have a backyard. Instead, you have this peristyle, which you know means columns lined around the outside, garden. And then the rooms on the sides and the back would be the kitchen and the dining room. And here is the atrium, or sorry, here is the house of the Vettii. So we were standing at that entrance, and then here's that back peristyle garden. It's a little different than the typical Roman house. I'm going to attach or include the video for the typical Roman house. I like this video a lot. But let's look at the house of the Vettii. So we were standing here, and there's our atrium, and we're looking out into this back garden. Nice. Ooh, let's go further. Let's go into that garden. So do you see how this was a sanctuary, a respite from the hustle and bustle of the loud, noisy city behind these walls? And the rooms all would come into or face into this open space. It provided light and fresh air and a beautiful view. Now, obviously, these are not the original plants from the house of the Vettii, but this is following the plan and the evidence of the plants that were buried here at the time of the volcanic eruption. What we also see are some of the paintings that were preserved along the walls, and that will lead us to our next topic of discussion, Roman Republic paintings.